I'm going to speak this morning about Moses. We're going to go for one of the bigger miracles. That's crossing the Red Sea. Seems a fairly major evolution considering us here in little old Crowhurst. But the story does tell us much about God, how he cares for his people then and now, and God does not change. So we can see his faithfulness through the ages. Israel was in captivity then. Sometimes today we find ourselves captive too. It's a very small word, and yet it can describe a very big emotional prison. Perhaps it's a physical prison. There are many sorts of prisons, and the Lord knows when we are in captivity. It can be a great burden, it can be an impossible situation. It seems sometimes there may be no way out, no solution visible, no hope even. That must have been what it was like for the Israelites, who were stuck in the desert under their Egyptian masters. And yet God does care for us. And this story shows how much. I'm going to read from Exodus in a moment, but I'm just going to give a brief resume of Moses, his life up to the point where he was facing the Red Sea. He was brought up in Egypt. He lived a very good life as the son of the Pharaoh's family. He had to flee when he saw some injustice to his own people. He knew he was a Hebrew, and he thought he would right a wrong. It had an unexpected consequence. He killed a man, and he had to flee. And he fled to Midian. He'd been born in Egypt, so he had no idea what was over the horizon, and now he had to go and find out. Having got to Midian, he was taken under the roof of the priest, and he lived there as a shepherd. And then on one day he had the rather famous event where he saw a burning bush that was not consumed by the fire. And he went over to look, and he met God there. It was an interesting conversation for Moses. He was asked to go and rescue his people. No small jobs then, just the big ones. And he was not an eager leader, he was a reluctant leader. He tried to find all sorts of excuses as to why he should not be the one to do the job. The Lord was very patient with him, went through all the reasons why Moses was wrong and God was right. He was eventually persuaded. It was the fact that his brother Aaron could speak for him. That was, seems to be the clincher. So the two of them set off back to Egypt. During the conversation with God, Moses had been holding his staff, which one of the signs he had seen during the conversation was God said, "Throw your staff on the ground," and it turned into a snake. And then God said, "Pick it up by its tail," which Moses did with some trepidation, and it turned back into the staff. So I think Harry Potter's got nothing on that, but there we are. When they went to Egypt, they went to see Pharaoh, and the request was made, we'd like to go and worship the Lord on the Lord's mountain, and please let us go. And Pharaoh said no. And then Pharaoh took the opportunity of it was really a sort of quick clincher, really. He could take advantage of the situation. So he gave a further order that the Israelites should collect their own straw and make the same number of bricks, which didn't go down well. But that did upset the Lord, who then told Moses and Aaron, "You're coming out now. You're going to bring the people out." And the way that was done, of course, was the 10 plagues. And that's a good quiz question as to how to name them. But it's the 10th one that had the main power. The 10th one was that the Lord would go over the land and kill the firstborn. That would be of the people and the animals, people in prison, slaves. No one was left out, except the people of Israel, who were given very clear instructions as to what they should do, and this was how the Passover was started. They had to kill a lamb and put the blood over the doorpost, and then the Lord would pass over and not take their firstborn. So that's what happened. And the people, the Pharaoh said, "Be gone," and Moses led the people out of the promised land, out of captivity towards the promised land. And they took with them a lot of the riches of Egypt, so that they had something to start with. And they went by the desert road, and they were led by a pillar of cloud in the day, and by a pillar of fire at night. So that sets the scene. We are heading into the desert. And I'm now going to read from Exodus chapter 14. It is on the screen. That's wonderful, thank you. And this is what it says. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their mind. "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, and with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." This passage shows that God got the people of Israel to change course so that Pharaoh would think they were confused. Then Pharaoh raised up a great army of chariots and people and sent them after the Israelites. It was when they saw each other across a small divide that the Israelites lost their courage. All they could see was the force of Egypt on one side heading towards them and the Red Sea behind them, which was quite impassable. Moses replied, "Do not be afraid," and those other words. You will see the deliverance of the Lord. Did it sound as though that reply was adequate at this moment? Possibly not, but it was truth, and those words had the power of God in them. But we can see and take quite a lot from this situation that the Israelites were facing. Firstly, God had a plan. He had provided leaders. Those were Moses and Aaron. They had their strengths and they had their frailties. He also equipped Moses for the job. One of those was the staff that he could use to perform signs. That applies to us when we are stuck in our captivity, in a situation we cannot deal with, we cannot understand, we cannot escape from. God has a plan for us. The problem the Israelites had was that they couldn't see part of God's plan. They didn't know they were going to run out of bread. God did. When they ran out of bread, God gave them manna. The people didn't know they were going to run out of water, but it was probably fairly evident that they would. God cured those toxic pools so that the water was drinkable. God used tactics in the way Pharaoh acted. Through God's plan, Pharaoh was confused as to what the Israelites were doing. The people couldn't see those parts of God's plan. We can see them because we're told about them. Unfortunately, sometimes we can't see parts of God's plan for us, and therefore we get despondent when God has it all in hand. God was active in the enemy camp. He misled them and caused confusion to them. He hardened Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes hardening Pharaoh's heart, or when God hardens anyone's heart, it sounds as though he's making them bad so that then they get punished for it. It's not like that. To harden God's heart, it is a righteous act by God that he can use to bring glory to himself. And he uses it when rebellious people refuse to accept his grace. He sort of says, if you go off on your own way and will not accept my help, then I will harden your heart. It will, in effect, confirm what you have decided to do. But God will get glory for that. God will find glory. And sometimes we can't see that. We can see it when it happened for the Israelites because we're told about it. But sometimes when God is active in the enemy camp for us and is hardening the enemy's hearts to get glory, then it doesn't help us because we can't see it happening in God's plan for us. So Moses' reply from God were godly words that were for the people's benefit then and are for our benefit now. If we're in captivity, we can hear God say to us, "Do not be afraid, stand firm. You will see the deliverance of the Lord today." The Egyptians, whatever our Egyptians are in today's world, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And what does being still mean? It has a lot involved in it. It's about focus on God. It's about the peace of God. It's about trusting in God. It's about quietening our heart, quietening our racing mind, sorting and quietening our jumbled thoughts. It's about focusing on God, focusing on who he is, looking at the character of God. Who is he? He is creator, he is saviour, he is shepherd, he is all-powerful, he is our shield, he is our strength and our fortress. This is the person in whom we put our faith and trust. And shortly after that, in the verse that follows, verse 14, which I read up to, it said, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry land.'" God used his leader and spoke through him to reveal the exit and the miracle that allowed the Israelites to cross the Red Sea, and after it closed, to prevent the Egyptians from following on the other side. And it's true to say that when we are in our captivity, God will provide a Moses type for us. Maybe a family member, maybe a friend, maybe a church, maybe somewhere like this place, where we in our captivity can hear the words of God spoken in power. And when we have that benefit, that God on our side, I think I would say to all of us, be of good cheer. Do not be people without hope. Do not believe that the issue that seems to take up all our energy at this time, all our attention, is one that can never be shifted, never be moved, never be resisted, never disappear. Because God is a God of promise. Promises never to leave us, promises to provide what we need to live properly, to live to his glory. And as was shown by Moses, we can cross the Red Sea that in the eyes of the world was an impossible thing to do. And after they went, Moses and Miriam managed to create a song of thanksgiving. It was a good ending to the story. Whatever the future held following their trip into the desert, as an example of God's care for us, as an example of God saying, there is nothing too big for me to deal with, because with me nothing is impossible. It is a story that we can hang on to as encouragement to be hopeful about the future.